Hello again, everybody. This is Dan Clouser, and welcome back to the Journey of My Mother's Son podcast. Today I'm joined by Rachel Folden, who was a four-time NFCA All-American at Marshall University before being drafted into the NPF, where she played for the Carolina Diamonds and the Chicago Bandits. And throughout her pro career, she was a four-time All-NPF Catcher. In 2011, she was the NPF Offensive Player of the Year. And in 2008 and 2011, she helped lead the Chicago Bandits to 2 NPF championships. Rachel, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Dan. Excited to be here.
No doubt. And the big thing that I didn't mention in my initial introduction there is she is also an on-field coach in the Chicago Cubs minor league organization. And I've had a lot of different female coaches on here, and the list is expanding. As of the first time I interviewed 2 female coaches, I'd covered 67% of the female coaches in pro ball at that point. Rachel was the one that I didn't get initially, but now that list is growing. It's somewhere around 10 or 11 female coaches. So first of all, Rachel, you and Rachel Balkovich were hired on the same day. Now that there's so many, like, what does it mean now when you keep hearing that, you know, the Red Sox have hired somebody, the Blue Jays have hired somebody, you know, and the list just goes on and on. I mean, how does that make you feel being one of the first ones through the door?
I mean, it makes me feel awesome. I'm one of the first ones through the door to be an on-field coach, but like to be a full-time on-field coach. But there's so many women that came before that have been kind of, you know, chipping away at this this thing that's baseball, that's only, you know, it's been very exclusive, male only. And so, you know, I was just fortunate to kind of be in the right place at the right time to be able to do this. And when you see this opportunity be available to other women, to me, it just signifies progress, both in the industry and also like as a society, that, you know, sports are supposed to be merit-based, right? That's supposed to be, if you're better, you will play more or you will earn more. And that's supposed to be how it is. And so when you see this happening, you know that there's a lot of qualified women out there, which is awesome. But you also see that people are open to it just because they want what's best for their organization. And I think that speaks volumes to the growth of the sport, but also just the growth of us as a society, that we're willing to just kind of cross over those traditional lines that you've always been able to see. And it becomes less and less of a big deal every single time that it's done. And that I'm very, very proud of.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And that's one of the things that, you know, I will continue to champion the cause, but I definitely hope that it gets to a point where, you know, every time I interview a female coach in professional baseball, it's not that big of a deal anymore, that they're just, you know, one more coach out there doing their job and doing best their ability and making an impact on the game. So tell me a little bit about the process. You know, when you heard about, well, I guess what made you apply for the Cubs position in the first place? And what was that process like up until when you got word that you were hired? What was your reaction like?
So in 2019, early 2019, Justin Stone and I we were working together. So I have a company at home called Folden Fastpitch, and just Stoney has a company called Elite Baseball. And we had been partnering. We'd been friends for a couple of years, and our companies had worked very closely together for the last few years. And he was also at the time a consultant for the Chicago Cubs. Well, he got hired as the director of hitting. And I guess one of his primary tasks was to hire minor league coaches. And he needed someone who knew how to incorporate the technology that we were going to be using at the Cubs organization. And he also needed somebody who had coaching experience. And so suddenly I was very well qualified for a position, and I was recommended to go interview. And so I went and took the interview and apparently didn't screw anything up and got the job. So it was a very like normal way to get hired, I guess, is, you know somebody at the company, they say, hey, we have an opening, would you like to apply for it? I went and applied for it, and there it is. So had I not been approached by Stoney, I don't know if I would be coaching in baseball right now, but I'm very fortunate to do it. It's a lot of fun, and it's just a really cool way to be. Like, I love people, so when I coach, because I love to interact with people. That's why I do it. And so this just gives me a new crop of people to be able to interact with. But like, when I got hired, I remember thinking like, holy cow, what did I just do? Because I knew my entire life was going to change, right? I've always been my own boss, running my own company, setting my own hours, setting my own schedule, charging what I want to charge, making what I want to make. And then all of a sudden I just kind of slid into like corporate America, right? Which is what baseball is. And so to just be able to like, holy cow, like what did I just do? But I was really so excited for it. And I knew it was something that I had to do, because I knew the importance of it, being a woman. And I know how many women have tried to get into this industry and how hard they fought, Rachel Folden being one of them. And so I wanted to make sure that, like, I knew I would do a good job. Like, I had confidence in my ability. So I was like, I have to take this position and go into baseball and just like dive straight in. And honestly, like, it's a great decision. I am like having such a good time.
Yeah, that's awesome. Was there any, one of the things we're hearing about right now is in the NFL, a lot of times where, there's a check the box interview. Was there any point where you were concerned about the process of you even being interviewed was simply just a check the box interview?
Yes, I actually asked that in my interview. I asked that to our director of player development. And I said, listen, I want to just be clear. Like, I'm not trying to be just, like you said, a box check. I want to be hired because you think that I'm a good coach. And it was very, very apparent that the Cubs were in the middle of kind of rebuilding their minor league coaching structure. And they brought me in because they wanted me to be a part of that, and they believed in my skills as a coach. So in that, but I was very, very, like, I didn't just want to be a canary, right? That's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to actually do this and be taken seriously for what I was doing. And the Cubs were very clear from day one that no, like, we don't have time to get this wrong and put you in front of players and get it wrong. We're only bringing in people that we think can do it right. And so once I went through that process of the interview, I felt really comfortable with what they were going to do for my professional development, as well as what I could bring to the table for the Chicago Cubs.
That's awesome. So once you got down there and, started interacting with the players, like we said, in 2020, it was kind of short-lived till the world shut down. But what was the initial reaction from some of the players that you were working with at the time? Did everybody embrace you, or was there any type of kickback whatsoever?
Honestly, the players, I don't really think care. I think the players trust the organization, and they are just looking for coaches and people that are going to help get them to the next level. And so, again, our organization does a very good job of never making me feel like I am less than. And so I think that trickles down to the players that I'm just a coach, right? And I am here to help you, and I'm here to build a relationship with you. And I didn't really ever feel a pushback from a player from a gender perspective. Now, I've felt pushback from players on I don't know if I believe what you're saying standpoint, which I think is just unique to coaching, not necessarily unique to gender. So, and that's always going to be the case, right? I'm always going to have players that I could get through to, I can mesh well with, and they listen. And there's always going to be players that just don't really like what I have to say, and they're going to go and do it their own way, or they're going to, gravitate towards another coach. And that's fine. Like, I have no problem with that, but I don't think that in my experience, that hasn't been because of my gender.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you're right. That's one of the things that you get in coaching in general. So I think that's great. And I know a lot of the players I've talked to, on this subject, they have kind of embraced it. Like, again, at the end of the day, they're just looking to improve their game. and it doesn't matter to them, what the gender is of the person who's helping them get to the next level. If they're going to help them get to the next level, they're going to embrace that and run with it. So I think that says a lot for how far we've come as a society. I know we still have a long way to go, but it does give us hope that we're moving in the right direction at times, for sure.
Right.
So the switch from softball to baseball. So obviously you played softball, All-American at Division I level, had a great pro career. When I believe you played some baseball as a kid, is that correct?
Yeah, I played Little League.
Yeah. So, and a lot of the softball players I've talked to, they've always kind of started out there, and then were just pointed in the direction of softball. But with the instruction, at what point did you start, doing more and more, diversifying your portfolio, so to speak, between working with softball players and then working with baseball players as well? And then how easy was that to translate into the Cubs job?
So I've been giving lessons since 2012, 2013 from a full-time perspective, because my last pro season was in 2012, and I went straight full-time into lessons after that. And I've always had like a baseball player or two sprinkled in here. I'm a huge baseball fan. I've always been a big baseball fan. Everything I learned on the internet was always from baseball people. And so it really wasn't like, I kind of always approached coaching my girls as though they were baseball players. And that's mostly because I always feel like softball got this watered down version of coaching. And I felt like I was doing a disservice to the girls to not give them, the latest training methods or the best training methods. And so I was always trying to learn and always trying to implement new things that I learned from the baseball side anyway. And so when I started working with Stoney, he brought me in to be a softball piece to his business. And I actually told him, I'm like, well, I want to be involved on the baseball side too, because I knew that that's where all of the advancements and the progress was going to be made. And then 5 years later, softball would get it. And that's always going to be the case because the money is in baseball, right? All of the investment is in baseball. And then it trickles down to the youth level and to softball. And so I wanted to be on the front end of everything. And I wanted to see everything that was going on in real time instead of having to find it out later. And he didn't even bat an eyelash. He was just like, oh yeah, that sounds awesome. Like, let's go. And from like the moment we started working together, he's said it a few times, or he's like, Rachel's going to coach in baseball someday. Like, I could see you coaching in baseball someday. And I always thought that was cool. I'm like, if that opportunity ever presents itself, I'd love to do it. But yeah, I don't really think there's a huge difference. And I mean, there are differences. Don't get me wrong. There are differences, but coaching players is coaching players. You have to get them to trust you. You have to love them. You have to show them that you care, and you have to know what you're doing. And if you can check all those boxes, it doesn't matter if you're coaching. You could coach any sport and be pretty successful at it if you could just do those 4 things.
Yeah. So I want to take one thing that you said out there about how you have to love your players. And, I coached for 30 years before Sandy and I decided to jump in this RV and drive around the country. And one of the best things that we've had in our journey is me being able to connect with some of my old players that are, again, just scattered throughout the country. When we were out in Arizona, I got to spend time with 2 of them out there. But I think a lot of people who aren't involved in coaching don't understand kind of that love relationship between a player and a coach. So I'd like for you to kind of expand on that a little bit.
Well, I mean, you're taking someone, and especially in baseball and softball, where it's a skill heavy sport, right? And it's very hard. You're taking, like, when players are on the field, a lot of times, like, that's the identity of the player. They are Rachel, the softball player, or Dan, the baseball player, right? That's their identity. And that's where they feel like they can be themselves the most. That's where they feel like they are themselves the most. They're also the most vulnerable in a lot of cases. And so showing them that you care about them in that setting when they are being the most vulnerable, when they're failing their tail off, right? And they're just struggling, and you can love them through it, I think is such a special bond that really only a coach and player can have. And it's special. Like I enjoy that. I'm leaving for Arizona next week, and I gave I worked up until yesterday was my last day of work up here in Northwest Indiana. And I gave my last lesson to a few kids this week, that are graduating seniors. They're not going to go play in college. And it was our last lesson. And it's like, I'm like sad about it. Like I'm upset about it, because it's like, wow, we've spent so much time, right? They've spent so much time and money, and we've just like been on this incredible journey. And, even though they're not going to go play in college, it's like, it was still so worth it to me. And, it seems as though it's very, very worth it to them too. And I just like that part of that bond that you can build with players in this setting. I think sports is such a good medium for bringing people together. And I'm so grateful for it, because I have some lifelong friends, both people that I've coached, people that I've played underneath, people that have coached me, people that I've coached alongside, people that I've played alongside. And that relationship building is just something that is so special to me.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt about that. I mean, like I said, the two players I was talking about earlier that we saw in Arizona, I mean, I probably hadn't seen, well, one of them came back to speak at our banquet about 3 years ago, but prior to that, I hadn't seen him for probably 10, 12 years before that. The other one I hadn't seen, for at least 15, 16, 17 years. And it's like, we just picked up exactly where we left off. And I do think that's a bond that, sports can help deliver, unlike, any other medium, for sure.
Right.
So you were a catcher when you played. I was as well. And I think catchers have a little bit of an unfair advantage going into the coaching world, because a lot of times you are part of the coaching staff to an extent.
Yep.
I know my conversations on the bench with catchers, talking about, how many more innings a pitcher had left in him or whatever the case is. I mean, many times if I was making a mound visit, I was kind of going this direction first to meet my catcher halfway to get the real story, because I know the pitcher is going to say, no, I'm good.
Mm-hmm.
The catcher is going to say, no, his ball's not as heavy today, or, whatever the case is. So how do you think, catching helped you make that transition from player to coach?
I think, because you're so tied in with the coaching staff, I'd say you're surrounded by your coaching staff a lot more than like an infielder or an outfielder would be, right? Because not only am I probably playing another position at some point, but I'm also involved in all the bullpen talks and all the bullpen meetings and getting everybody on the same page. There's a lot of interaction with coaching staff there. There's a lot of trust that goes on between catcher and coaching staff, but there's also this like therapeutic calming force that we have to be too for our pitchers, because we recognize the importance of our pitchers. And so we have to almost like have that relationship be so strong and have them trust us so much that like we can help them through when they're struggling, right? We can pump them up. We can we find our little buttons that we can push with each pitcher. And I think that's unique. It's not something that a shortstop has control over as much as a catcher does. And I think that just builds that skill for us that tells us like, hey, I know how to speak to you. I know how to speak to you. I know how to speak to you. And that's essentially what coaching is. So I think it gives us just kind of a head start on our communication skills that come along with coaching. And that's probably why we see it's such a natural fit for catchers to go into the coaching field.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think, before the podcast, obviously I like to do some research on all my guests, and I was, checking out your website for Folden Fastpitch. And, one of the things again that stuck out there was how you guys really embrace individuality. And I think what you just said is one of those things that really reiterates that. I mean, there is no cookie cutter approach to, coaching, or, as a catcher, you're dealing with, 5 or 6, or, in professional baseball, 12 different personalities of pitchers. as a coach, you're dealing with 25 different personalities, and not, that same approach doesn't work for every single player. I mean, some you can be a little harder on, some you got to handle more with kid gloves. What do you think it was throughout your playing career that helped you embrace that theory of understanding that we're all individuals, and, there's certain dynamics of, mechanical things that work for everybody in baseball and softball, but there's still this brain inside of every person's head that you've got to figure out how to get it to them?
Well, it didn't come naturally for me. I'll be honest with you. When I first started coaching, my very first coaching job was at Holy Names University in Oakland, California. It's a school of about 1,500 kids, and we had a softball team that was actually pretty decent, pretty good for such a small school in the Bay Area. And I remember I was fresh out of college. I was fresh out of playing my first professional season, and I was feeling pretty good about myself, and I thought I knew everything because I was really good. And so I would coach those girls the way that I wanted to be coached. Not the way that they needed to be coached, but the way that I wanted to be coached. And because that was all I knew, right? When you're a player, you're taking care of your own career, right? You're in charge of one person. You're in charge of one person's career. And while I was a stubborn player, and I think any coach would tell you that, any coach of mine will tell you that, while I was pretty stubborn and I always really wanted to hear you out, listen to what you have to say, but then it eventually make my own decisions about my career, I wasn't giving those girls the opportunity to do that. I just wanted them to be like me. And it was very limiting. I remember getting there. So I went from, playing at a Division I school where all I did was softball. I mean, I basically majored in softball, and going to coach at this NAIA university. And I'm like looking around and I'm like, hey, where's so-and-so? And her teammates are like, she's at work. And I'm like, what the heck is she working for? Did we have practice? Like, she has to be here, because at a Division I school that would never happen.
Right.
And so I'm like, so these girls aren't serious. They're not committed, blah, blah, blah. I did the classic, like, if it doesn't work, I'm going to blame the player coaching, which is, 99% of coaches. And it took me a minute to realize, like, okay, hold on. Like, she has a different story than you. She has to go and work to be able to go to school. You didn't have to do that. You got your school paid for. She's got to do that. So she has a different story than you, and I should be more sympathetic to that. And I was only at that school for 1 year, but as I moved on, I started to learn, and it's really interesting because I think any coach will tell you this. Like, we've probably looked at video, or we've looked at, a picture of somebody, and we're like, man, that guy is really good, or that girl's really good, but I would never teach the way that they do that. I would never teach that swing, or I would never teach that the way that they pitch. And it's like, okay, so then I started to look at it and I'm like, okay, so there are some pro players that I played with that their swings maybe weren't like aesthetically pleasing. And I'd be like, okay, well, I'm never going to teach girls to do it that way. But then I look at it, I'm like, okay, well, they were a pro. They hit 300 as a pro. They slugged like, 500 as a pro. So why would I not teach people to do what they do? And so then it started to shift my focus to, okay, we're looking at the wrong thing here. I'm looking at it from a lens of, here's everything they're doing wrong, instead of looking at it from a lens, well, what do they do right? Yeah. And then why are they so good at doing that thing right so often? And when I started to shift my focus there, that's when I started to say, holy cow, I'm trying to fix everybody and steer them into a mold that I've created, which, by the way, looks like me, right? Have to swing like me, have to throw like me, have to have the same mentality as me, have to be boisterous and loud like me. Well, hold on, wait a second. But I've played with players that aren't like me, and they were really good. So what did they do? And so now you try to find these commonalities of, what do we do well? And then how can we help you do that thing that you do well more often? And once I started to look at that, that's when everything started to be individualized. You can see things, and that's what, the data and the technology helps with, is it's objective. So I can now go in and look and go, wow, God, that swing is like, it's mangled and it's ugly, but like, it's freaking efficient. So am I really going to mess with it? The kid's hitting. Am I really going to mess with it? And so I think that's where my course kind of shifted to making things individual. Is we can all get there in 100 million different ways. So let's find your way, and then let's find your way, and then let's find your way. And that, to me, is how coaching should be.
Yeah. And I love that. And I know, throughout my coaching career, I've had the benefit to be around a lot of professional players. And I know, I would hear guys a lot of times, kind of the more old school type of guys are like, that kid, just like you said, that kid's swing is ugly. And I'm like, well, that kid's hitting, 390 right now. So, yeah, but the thing is, he's not going to be able to do that in college. I'm like, okay, well then in college, he can make an adjustment, and we had Billy Ripken come speak at our banquet, while I was still with the organization. I remember him saying about, if you look at Cal Ripken Jr., he said he had, throughout his career, 100, 200 different stances and swings and stuff like that, because he made adjustments. What worked when he was a rookie didn't necessarily work when he was in his mid 30s. And I think a lot of times we forget that as coaches, that, everything about the game of baseball and softball is making adjustments. You can't take the same approach to someone who's, throwing super hard to, a knuckleballer in baseball, or, stuff like that. Somebody who's got a great changeup in softball, whatever the case is. And we do many times seem to forget that and think that there is just, again, this one cookie cutter approach to, this is the way it's done. This is the way to be successful. And it's the only way to make it happen. So I love the fact that you're able to embrace that. Now at the professional level, again, you're dealing with all these different personalities. What type of adjustment was it for you as a coach, going from, instructing kids and coaching kids to, again, coaching men who are, looking to make this their career and to get eventually to the big leagues?
It's different for sure. When you're giving lessons, people are paying you for your opinion. They pay you up front, and they expect you to coach your butt off, right? It's like, give me all the information, give me everything. I'm paying you for your expertise. When you work in a professional setting, it's very much a mutual respect of, you already have a very, very good understanding of what you do well. I'm going to observe. I'm going to watch. I'm going to be here if you need me. I'm going to be a facilitator. I will throw you 500 pitches of BP if you need it today. I will do whatever you need to do, but it's going to be stickier in the professional baseball setting if the ideas and the openness to change come from the player, versus me just coming in hot and saying, like, this is what you need to do. This is what you need to do. This is what you need to do. And I also think too, like, when people come into a lesson, I could tell them anything, and I can also try anything, because realistically, I'm not going to ruin a 12-year-old kid who's still growing, who still hasn't hit their adult body yet. I'm not going to ruin them by 4 weeks of trying something. I'm not. And I'm also going to build a better relationship anyway. If I try something, I fail, I tell them that, and then we just try something else, right? It just kind of levels the playing field between us. But with a pro, we can't really do that, because the organization spent a lot of money on these guys. And so what we can do is, we know, on the back end, versus like we can use R&D, we can use, I can go on the computer and look at the tech. We can figure out what's actually going on, and then we can hang on to it and say, okay, we're gonna have a meeting with you, and we're gonna tell you, this is what we see. Okay, you can take it or leave it. But all the while I'm working with this player, I'm building up this encyclopedia in my head of drills that I would try, cues that I would use, approach fixes that I could think of, and I'm just gonna save it. And this encyclopedia is gonna get thicker and thicker. And when that player struggles and they come to me, I'm going to be ready with that information. And I learned that from Andy Haynes, who's with the Brewers when I heard him speak, and now he's with Pirates. I heard him say that, and he called it like saving your bullets, right? It's like you just, every time you think of something, okay, I found that. All right, cool. That's a bullet. I'm going to keep it and I'm going to save my bullets. And when that player comes to me, I have to know that information in and out. And I think that's such a good approach that a coach can have, because it lets the player know, like, I'm here for you, but I'm also not trying to do it for you, right? It's your career. If you choose to go down the way you want to go down, hey, go for it. Like, I got no problem with that, but I'm going to be here for you if you need me, because I want you to succeed and I want you to get better. And so that's kind of the way I like to approach it.
Yeah, that's cool. What, so your first on-field game in professional baseball didn't happen then until 2021.
Correct.
Because the 2020 season was canceled. What was that feeling like for that first game when you were out there in uniform? Obviously, the crowds were probably limited and that sort of stuff, so some of the energy probably wasn't as much as normal. But what was that feeling like? I mean, was there like a wow? Like, I mean, tell me what it was like.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. As I'm getting dressed in the locker room, I'm putting the uniform on, and I'm like, this is pretty cool, And it's not, I'm putting on the uniform to go stand on the field in a spring training game, which I had done. It was like, this is for real. Like, this is my squad. This is my team, my group of players. And it was just so cool. I remember, taking a picture in the mirror and sending it to like all my friends and family members and loved ones. And it's like, it was just a cool moment. And then, you go out on the field and you're like, yep, it's still minor league baseball. Because we were out on field one. We weren't even in the stadium yet, because rookie ball usually play in the stadiums, but our stadium was getting worked on. So we're on field one. There's no fans. And it's just like, it's hot as heck, because it's in May. And it's like, all right, like, big moment, super cool for me. But it's like, and we're minor league baseballing right now, so let's do it. But yeah, it was awesome. It was a very, very cool experience. It was nice. It was a nice, because extended spring training is a grind at times. And so to be able to put the uniform on and coach in a real game was pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's cool. It definitely seems like the, with the group of female coaches that are in professional baseball right now, there's certainly a fraternity.
Yes.
And that you guys are absolutely all rooting for each other, which I don't think is necessarily the same with your male counterparts. But like when you heard that Rachel Balkovich was hired as a manager for the Yankees in single A ball, what was that like for you? And then was there any interaction between you two after you heard that news?
Yeah. So Rachel and I have been friends since we got hired. So it's a really cool story and I love to tell it. We were both working with Northwestern softball team. So Elite Baseball and I were consulting for Northwestern. Driveline was also consulting for Northwestern. And so we ended up being in the same place at the same time. And we're kind of competitors, right? But with most growth mindset people, we're also big fans of each other. So we got along really well. We were in the same building. So she was there. She was doing some gaze tracking. And she was in there, and I'm like, okay, like I knew who she was on the internet, and, I didn't know anything else about her. And she, like, I didn't know her personally. I knew about her, but I didn't know her personally. And so we're both in the same place. And so all of a sudden, like, I had been hired by the Cubs, and I already knew this, but I couldn't announce it yet because it wasn't public yet. And so I knew this, right? And the Northwestern coaches and I are good friends, so they knew. And so we're sitting there, like, we wrap up doing whatever we need to do. And then Rachel comes over to me and she goes, "Did you get hired by the Cubs?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she goes, "I got hired by the Yankees." I was like, "No way." And I like gave her a huge hug, and I'm just like, oh, it was like the biggest sigh of relief ever. Cause I was like, I'm not on this island by myself, and I'm on an island with somebody who has already done this. Like, she's worked in strength and conditioning, right? She's been in baseball for years. I'm like, oh, thank God. Like, this is like the perfect ally for me to have. Because at the time I was like, this is going to be big news. It's going to be like, I was fine with it, but it was like, it was just so comforting to know that I had someone who's gone through it in my corner, which was really cool. And when I heard she was a manager, I texted her right away. We were in the middle of a text conversation before that, and she had told me that someone had contacted her, but they were looking for me. And she's like, I don't think they're looking for the right Rachel. She's like, I'm going to forward this on to you. And I was like, okay, thank you. And the next day she got hired as a manager. So I texted her back and I said, I don't think anyone's going to be confusing us anymore. And I thought that was really cool. So yeah, we've been big supporters of each other. We've actually got this huge group of all the women working in baseball, and it's called the Alliance for Gender Equality in Baseball. We started this big group, and we just announced our social media and everything like that. And it just started out as a thread on WhatsApp where we just all kind of communicated with each other, and it's turned into something that I'm really proud of and really proud to be a part of. So it's just been awesome meeting all of the other women that work in baseball, whether they're in the front office, whether they're in, on-field coaches, nutrition, strength and conditioning, you name it, scouting. We're all kind of, just, we all have a commonality in this. We're women working in baseball. So it's been fun to meet most of them too.
Yeah, that's so cool. And, I think everyone that I've talked to has also embraced the fact that you guys are trailblazers, and you're paving the way for the next generation, and you all take it very seriously as to how important it is for 11, 12, 13, 14, 16, 18-year-old girls to go on social media and see that you guys are doing this. And what's the phrase? If you can see it, you can be it. And as you guys were growing up, you couldn't necessarily see it, but you still ended up being it. So, what is it about that group that, comprehends so well the importance of blazing this trail for this younger generation?
I just think it's important because I'm a big advocate of self-expression and being yourself. And I've always been a baseball fan, and I've always been pushed away from baseball, right? Go play softball, go do this. And it's like, but if I really am true to myself, I really do love the game of baseball, and I would love to be a part of it. I wanted to play baseball. Okay. I never wanted to play softball. I wanted to play it, and I always got pushed away. And so now, given the opportunity, it's like, I've just got to be true to myself. This is something that I've always wanted to do, so I've got to go do it. And I think that, to me, is the biggest impact of all of this. And that's why this visibility piece is so important. And talking to people like you who can get our message out there is because if you have like a love for baseball, right? That should be something that should be fostered. And so now that there's a path paved, people don't have to push you away from it. It's like, no, there's actually a way to do this. And there's people that are doing it right now. Here, let me show you. Versus this is, I have huge respect for like Kim Ang and Rachel Balkovec and Gene Afterman and all these people who it wasn't easy for them to do it, right? But they made it significantly easier for people like me to do it. And now in turn, I can make it significantly easier for other women to do it, should they so choose to do that. And I think, there are so many young women who play baseball first. I played baseball first. There's so many young women that play baseball first. And then they get pushed to softball because they just think like, that's what I have to do. Well, what if there was a path that said you didn't have to do that? We can keep you in baseball, maybe not as a player yet. Okay. Yet. I'm not ever going to close the door on that, but maybe not as a player when you get older, but dang it, you could coach in this sport. You could work in the front office. You could work in nutrition. You could work in strength and conditioning. You can be an athletic trainer. the possibilities are endless if you want to stay in this game. And that is something that I think we all take very seriously. And I'm very, very happy with that. Like, I don't look around and think like, oh gosh, she's not a good role model for what we're trying to do here. The women that have been hired in the sport are freaking awesome. And we're doing such a good job doing what we have to actually be good at our jobs, right? We're doing a really, really nice, look at the track of Rachel Valkovich. Like, look at Kim Eng's a GM, right? Like, she's kicking ass. Like, that is the type of stuff that shows women that not only can you do this, but if you're good at it and you take it seriously, just like you would any other job, you actually have possibilities for advancement now too. And I think that's been the piece that has been missing for a while, is now we have possibilities for advancement. But yeah, the women that are holding these positions, both behind the scenes, women whose name you'll never hear, right? In the front office, scouting, whatever, those names that you'll never hear, they're just, I haven't met anyone that I'm just not like, holy cow, like, incredible woman who's doing some incredible things. So I'm fortunate to be a part of that crew.
Yeah, and women have been involved in baseball for so much longer than we even realize. If you think about just baseball stadiums in general, Major League Baseball stadiums wouldn't look the way they do today if it wasn't for a woman, which was Janet Marie Smith, who designed Camden Yards, who then went on and designed the monster seats at Fenway Park. Prior to that, baseball stadiums are all big, round, AstroTurf, ugly looking facilities, and it was a woman who kind of paved the way to create all these little, ballparks to fit in these unique positions in cities, which I think a lot of people, oftentimes forget. So I do love that. I mean, Sandy and I last July were able to attend the Baseball for All Nationals in Aberdeen, Maryland. And I forget the exact number. It was about 60 teams of all girls baseball teams. It was one of the most enjoyable experiences we've had. I got to do a bunch of podcasts with a bunch of the coaches and some of the players that were at that event. So I think, again, progress is slow, right? But the fact that, now these girls can see you guys out there doing what you're doing. There's talk of a women's league being started in Florida by Sue Zippe, who was one of the original AAG BPL players. And that's starting to gain some traction. So, there's definitely more and more opportunities that are being created for females in the game. And I think that's what we need. And it's funny, a lot of times, like, I've had people actually ask me, like, why are you an advocate of, women in the game? Because you're not a woman. I'm like, well, that's probably the stupidest question I've ever heard, because, what does it matter if I'm a female or not? I mean, this is about getting the best people involved in a game that I love, a sport that I love. And the gender should not affect that whatsoever. So I'll continue to be out there advocating for you guys, and I hope that I'm constantly playing catch up to try to interview and do podcasts with all the female coaches, because, like I said, I went from having 67%. If you and I would have done this interview back in 2020, I would have had all the female coaches in baseball interviewed at that point, to now really trying to keep up with who's getting hired. So it's, as far as I'm concerned, it's a good problem for me to have, for sure. We're just about out of time. And anything that we didn't cover that you want to mention before we get to my final question?
No, I mean, I just have had a blast just talking to you, Dan. So thank you.
I appreciate you taking the time, and I absolutely wish you the best of luck this year. I don't know if we'll get to Arizona in the summer. We try to chase weather. and Arizona in the summer is not always on the top of my radar. But
don't blame you. It's okay. It's okay.
But if we do, I will definitely look you up. But as you know, the subtitle of the podcast is Many Little People in Many Little Places, which comes from the opening lyrics of a Michael Franti song, which go, when many little people in many little places do many little things and the whole world changes. So it's one of the little things that Rachel does on a daily basis to try to make the world a little bit better place.
Well, it's a good question. I'm myself. I'm unapologetically myself. And I do believe that makes the world a better place because it encourages other people to do the very same thing. I think we get caught up in trying to be the version of ourselves that other people want, or we try to be the version of ourselves that we think we need to be instead of just being yourself. And I think the fact that I just walk around and I am me, I don't try to be anybody other than myself, I think really normalizes things like women working in baseball or being a gay woman in America. I think that there's so many things where I'm me, and what you see is what you get with me. And I wish that my hope is, I guess, that bleeds off into other people and that encourages them to do the very same thing, because you're a lot happier that way when you just live who you are and be true to yourself.
Amen to that. That's great. That's a great way to go about life, without a doubt. Want to give a shout out. How can people find Folden Fastpitch? If you want to give a quick shout out to the business, and then we'll sign off here.
Sure. So foldenfastpitch.com. You can also follow Folden Fastpitch on all of the social medias. And we also just launched a website called elitefastpitch.tv, which is an online training resource, and it's the best there is, in my opinion. Obviously, I'm a little biased, but I'm okay with that. Check it out. And if you need to get in touch with me, my contact info is pretty easy to find. So.
Awesome. All right, Rachel, I really appreciate the time. And for those out there listening, be sure to check out my blogs and other podcasts at danclouser.com. You can also get a copy of my book and my upcoming book, The Beauty of a Diamond for the Eyes of a Coach, on Amazon. And The Journey of My Mother's Son, Volume 1, will be available on Amazon in about the next month. Rachel, thanks again for taking the time. And again, I wish you the best of luck going into the 2022 baseball season here.
Thanks, Dan.